There are so many major structural changes right across the world in so many sectors, so many areas. And Deloitte have been analysing this, and I'm joined by Frank Friedman, who's the Chief Operating Officer, because Frank, here at Brussels Forum 2018, you laid out very clearly some very big challenges which are just beyond the kind of ephemeral stuff of today.
Yeah, we had a good discussion yesterday. We talked about trade, which seems to be a hot button right now. It seems to be in the news a little bit. We talked about inequality, which is an issue that the world has to face. And we talked about technology and how it disrupts your lives and how it's disrupting business.
But what about your main message of how profound this is now and how difficult it is for many to handle the enormity of change that's taking place?
Well, the challenge really is for all those things. So I think the pace of innovation is outstripping the ability for people to consume that innovation. And when that happens, productivity doesn't move at all. And when that happens, real wages don't move at all. And so what we've seen throughout US and throughout Europe is the fact, a couplefold. One is that wages are fairly stagnated, leading to inequality. And the second thing that we have seen also is that because of technology, certain people don't have the skills to continue in the workforce. And that's problematic, which leads to inequality, which leads to what are policymakers doing and what are businesses doing.
This is a time of great disruption and uncertainty. The one word you kept using was displacement yesterday.
Well, it's displacement from a number of different perspectives, particularly the workforce. And how does a 50-year-old or 60-year-old, in a personal case, if you get displaced, how do you compete in the workforce if you don't have the skills, if you've not been brought up to retrain yourself, from early? You've kind of been doing the same thing, you haven't retrained, you haven't kept up with technology. What do you do? And what's the obligation that that policymakers have, and what's the obligation businesses have to help you survive in a world that's moving faster than you can absorb?
Help us understand that, because you, again, quite apart from talking about displacement, you then moved on to what you've just said, the role of policymakers, the role of corporate leaders, how that might have to change or should change now, because there are different responsibilities, encouragements, and also the public expect more of leaders and also corporate leaders.
Right. I throw one more in there, and that's the role of educators as well. And so, if someone gets displaced, what's the role of the policy around, is there a certain income guarantee that person is going to have? What happens to medical costs if that person is displaced? What happens to pensions costs if that person is displaced? Is there a role that the policymakers have in retraining people who have been displaced? What's the role of businesses? Deloitte did a survey recently of 1,600 C-suite type of executives throughout the world, and 75% said that the business influence will be more significant than the government influence on fixing some of the issues that need to be fixed over the next many years, particularly as it relates to the workers and particularly as it relates to a growing inequality throughout the world.
One of the phrases used here has been, does the old playbook still work? What has to be done by those at the top? Do they just bunker themselves in, or do they realize they now have almost a social responsibility to help? And can they do that?
Well, I believe that businesses, when they focus on something, can do something.
But are they focusing enough at the moment?
I think it's I think it's mixed. It's like everything else. I think some businesses do focus on those sorts of things, and some businesses probably don't. But I think there is a growing recognition by all businesses that their business is going to be disrupted, that the type of worker they're going to have in the future might be different than the worker they have today. And so, and their social obligations might be different than they've been accustomed to. So, yeah, I think businesses are getting it more and more, that to survive, they have to think about different operating models and different ways to run their business.
But as you said right at the beginning of this few minutes with us, in the end, the future is coming very quickly now, and and is ahead of the ability of those in positions of power and responsibility to handle it. How do they equip themselves? How do they mobilize themselves to cope with this, rather than hoping it'll go away or be done in their time frame as opposed to the kind of time frame that you're identifying now, which is much faster?
Well, that's a challenge for all businesses right now because businesses are made up of people. And it's up to, I think, the leaders of that business to look not at tomorrow, but to look 5 years ahead and 10 years ahead as to what might happen through all the disruption. They can't forecast the disruption, but they can plan for the disruption. And so I think that they're going to, and we're doing it, look at what's going to happen to your workforce. What's going to happen to technology? How are you going to marry the workforce and the technology needs that you have? Are you going to have employees that are on your balance sheet, i.e. you pay them a salary? Or are you going to use independent contractors? The world's kind of moving to a different worker model as well. And then how are you going to layer this technology into your business to disrupt others? And what you have to also consider, what are others doing to disrupt you? And so I think it's a convergence of a lot of things, and it's going to take a lot of thought and serious thought. But I think the businesses are up to doing it.
They're up to doing it, but is there a level of conformity in the minds at the moment which says, well, that's the way we've done it so far. We're going to have to find a way of just slightly changing what we're doing as opposed to radical change?
I think what I've seen from businesses across the globe is that there are different maturity models around that question. But I think they're all kind of coalescing that they need to move sooner rather than later, that the world is changing quicker than if they've been accustomed to over the last 20 years. And their mindset is to identify the needs, think about in the future more than they thought about before, and make some changes now.
What about the executive class? Because there are those who, at a certain age, in the 20s and 30s, are sort of saying, in the end, I'm not sure I want to go into business anymore. I want to do a start-up and take my risks.
Yeah, isn't that great? If I was 40 years younger, I might do the same thing. I think...
But it's a big question.
You know, I can speak to some of the states and some of the universities in the states. They encourage that sort of thinking. And that's how you become innovative, and that's how you change the world. And if you're a young person who's in your 20s and maybe low 30s and want to do something different, I would encourage them to try something different. They only get one chance at this thing. And I think that they're going to be the future of our innovation, are those people who do the risk-taking. Now, if you're in your 50s or 60s, it's a little harder to think that you're going to take that risk.
What about the qualifications that people need for the future? Because I've been in background conversations with very senior executives, right in the C-suite level, saying we don't want MBA anymore. We want different people, particularly in the banking business and fintech. They want data engineers. In other words, a big change in the expectation of the skill set.
They do. I don't think that change is as pervasive as some of the rhetoric. There's still a need for MBAs. I don't think you'll find, especially in the States, that the MBA market is decreasing all that substantially. We still look at MBAs among a whole host of people that we look for. It is clear that if you're an engineer or a big data analytical person, that there's a need right now. But you still need people who can think strategically. Maybe those are engineers and data people, but it's also MBAs, it's also a whole bunch of other sorts of folks. You still need people who can communicate. You still need people who can be empathetic. You still need people who can think strategically and make strategic decisions. So I wouldn't say that the MBA is on the way out. I just think it's being complemented and augmented by a whole number of different sorts of people.
Final thought, if we may, Frank. Say we were talking here, hypothetically, in 2020 or 2023, 2 or 5 years. What will you be saying, do you think, or might you be saying about where we got it right, where we got it wrong, the speed of what is happening? In other words, the speed taking off even at an even greater pace than we're thinking here in March 2018?
I think by 2020, it takes a while to change a ship, as much as people believe it's important to do. And people do believe it's important, and they're trying hard. But it takes a little while to change that ship. So I think by 2020, we might be saying some of the same things. But if you look to 2025, I think I think we will have gone by and past the time where people would have changed, past the time where they're trying to disrupt other businesses, past the time they may have been disrupted. So I think 2 years is a short horizon for massive change to occur. But I do think that if you look in the next 5 to 7 years, you'll see that.
Do you fear, though, that you may be saying people have not been bold enough at the top to understand the enormity and what really needed to be done?
I think there's a difference between theoretically thinking how the world's going to change and doing it. And even in the survey that Deloitte conducted, the view was, yes, digital and AI and robotics are going to have a massive change, but there's a cost to doing it. There's an investment to do it. There's a time frame to get it done. It doesn't happen because one says get it done by tomorrow. It's going to take some time and some capital to get it done right.
Frank Friedman, Chief Operating Officer for Deloitte, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.